Welcome to Relationship Mastery, a podcast for those who want to learn how to master the art of creating happy, healthy, and loving relationships. Please join me, Adey-Jones, and my co-host, Barry Selby, each Tuesday at 1 p.m. Pacific for a lively and informative conversation on everything to do with relationships. Welcome, everybody. Hi, Barry. Good to see you again.
Dale, it's good to be back. Let's have some good conversation today. It's going to be good.
I know it is. Well, we're going to follow on from what we talked about last week. I had a couple of comments on it, and that was we talked about why we are more critical of our partners than most other people. And I put my hand up and said, me too. But I think I shouldn't say all of us, but I think a lot of people are. They're more invested, have higher expectations. You live together often and you're on top of each other. It's not like you can just sort of like a friendship where you can take a little break if the other person's getting on your nerves a bit. But you tend to be a little freer with your feedback on their behavior. So, putting it nicely. So today I thought we would talk about it. I call it the bank account of goodwill. And the reason I call it that is because I think all our relationships are like bank accounts. And you can only withdraw what you put in, bottom line. Otherwise, you're going to be overdrawn. And
Yes.
banks are not happy about that. So often in relationships, and it's not just our intimate relationships, this is also with our children, we tend to sort of take it for granted that we can just keep pointing out the negatives and criticizing somebody for what they're doing and not realizing that when we do that, we're eroding at that relationship. We're doing the withdrawals and we're not depositing anything in. So it's really, in my book, really important to just comment on what might be little things, but to constantly throughout the day remind your partner or your children or your family or whatever of things that you notice and appreciate about what they've done. And it doesn't have to be giant things. It's just little things like, thank you, that really meant a lot to me. It really helped when you did this, or I love it when you say that. It costs nothing. And it just keeps that bank account so full with goodwill that when you do need to address a situation that is problematic, there's enough buoyancy in that bank account. There's enough deposits there of goodwill that it doesn't feel like you're going into a negative or withdrawn or whatever. So, and I know you have another way of looking at this too, which I'd love for you to share.
Well, the thing is that, and this really comes to the heading, kind of like a transactional relationship versus transformational relationship, meaning that for some people in relationship, and I know I was this way before myself, it was almost like keeping a scorecard where there was like excuse me, let me own that one. I used to be in a pattern where I would not even do it intentionally, but probably would just keep score of like how much I gave to how much I got back from my partner. And it's not about love. This is not about joy and upliftment and contribution. And as you were saying, like, valuing. It was really about, am I getting enough back for what I'm giving to the relationship? Which again, transactional versus transformational, which is not, frankly, what is healthy. Although I know many people do this. And so the idea of having a bank account that isn't something you keep track of the balance on, but more that you keep feeding and adding to, like an investment account in a way. There's a whole different paradigm at work here because it takes us out of the give to get. It gets into the flame of basically give to give in a way, because you just do it from a place of just, I enjoy being in this relationship and I want to contribute to it and us by just valuing what I have.
Yeah.
For some people, it's a paradigm shift.
That's so funny. I can honestly say, I think it's actually a different subject because I see it, what you're talking about, but I don't think I've ever thought about, am I getting what I'm putting in? It's never really occurred to me. Classic codependent here. You just
No, but the thing is, for me, it does tie together with the idea of this bank account, because it is about, because when you said about being overdrawn, it just hit me as like, oh yeah, there's things where it's been very unbalanced one way or the other. I know I've had it. I have seen it a couple of times more recently in a friendship I have, not in a relationship, but in a friendship, where there was a part of me feeling like I was getting used. And this is something I know a lot of people deal with, in the sense that my friend was basically getting a lot from me without giving much back to it. And I felt like I wasn't being taken care of the way I wanted to be taken care of in the friendship. and I had to say something about it because it felt out of balance. So in a sense, that bank account is different in the sense that it's about the relationship is the bank account. We're both feeding into it or choosing to feed into it. But also at the same time, there's a sense that one person is taking the money out whilst the other person is putting the money in, sort of thing. And
Yeah.
that's where you get balance.
Yeah, no, absolutely. I think I think 100% it is like a bank account. I think it's slightly different from, I think what I'm talking about here is that, um, that sort of, and it's, the sort of nagging, the critical, the,
Yeah.
the wearing down of another person that and you can actually tell yourself, oh, I'm helping them. I'm only telling them the truth. Well, you know what? There is no truth. It's only your truth, which we will
I,
get into in another show. But I think I'm talking about more about, I keep thinking about, when I was a child and I was at school, and there were certain teachers that were really lovely and warm. One, two, actually. I went to an Irish girls' convent, so pretty harsh. But there were
yeah.
two teachers that I can remember that were lovely to me. The rest of them I did not like, and but those subjects where the teachers were loving and kind, I excelled in. And the ones where I felt judged or bullied or mistreated, I just withdrew. And I didn't try. I didn't want any attention from them because I was so scared that it was going to be negative attention. So I just sort of slunk off into the back of the classroom and just, I did my work, but I didn't fully show up as well as I did in the subjects. And now I've added another woman onto that one. So three teachers out of
It
but
expands. Yes.
it expands exactly. But I realized what had happened in that situation was there was no goodwill. They had never established goodwill, rapport, um, care, and that's what I'm saying is I think in our relationships we, especially in our romantic relationships, we come into them and we have this sort of expectation of perfection, and then we start seeing the sort of chinks and things like that, and then we start commenting on them, and then they have a life of their own, and it
Hmm.
starts, just as I say, just withdraw, 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 because you've taken it for granted that there's this bank account of love and perfection and romance and everything. And I think, as I said, to be aware of, if you do need to bring up things, that you have to balance it with the deposits of recognizing the good, recognizing and being grateful for the little things about them as well as the big things, but just keeping in mind never to just keep eroding away at our children, eroding away at the other person. So that's where I'm sort of coming from more today,
No,
is that. Have you, I
I
mean, I'm curious, how have you ever experienced that in a relationship where somebody has just been hypercritical of you to the point where you just sort of are a puddle on the floor and don't even try anymore?
thankfully not to that extent, though I have had the experience where I have felt that coming and almost basically been deterred from even maintaining the relationship because I just knew it was going to suck on my side of things to do that.
Mm,
I have friendships indeed that I basically walked away from because there was no way to find balance with them. There was no, it wasn't mutual. It was no longer in a valid place where we could add to each other, and it's just a take, 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 and it's not necessarily where it's a critical nature. It's almost like an energy suck, to be blunt.
yeah.
I have people I know in my life, and I use the term energy vampire because it's the term that most eloquently describes the feeling of being sucked away energy from. That there are people I just won't be around anymore,
Mhm.
and they were, let's just say that they were friendships that were not based on fact at the time. They were just friendships that seemed a good idea at the time. They went, oh, this is a bad choice, back out of this one, sort of thing. And
Yeah.
so I learned to take care of myself. And part of that challenge is that for some people, and you said earlier about the codependency piece, is that we sometimes look for somebody else to fill ourselves up versus filling ourselves up on our own. And the work I've been doing, since the beginning of the year, I've been really focusing on the self love premise as a focus about the relationship we have with ourselves. And in the idea of the bank account, it is tempting sometimes to rely on the other person to feel filled up. And at times it's okay. That does happen. We do that in life where sometimes we feel down and a partner's the one that lifts us up, and that's wonderful. At the same time, because as I said, it's like we both contribute to the bank account, that sometimes being in a relationship with somebody, it's a I was going to say a zero sum game. It's not the right term, but it's a sense where basically we're feeding it and it's always being drawn up by the other person. That it can sometimes mean that being alone is actually a healthier place to be than being in a relationship with somebody who is that draining of us, or the draining of the bank account, so to speak.
Mhm.
So to feed a bank account, if you're feeding a bank account that someone else has access to and they keep taking money out and you keep putting money in and you're not getting anything back, that doesn't make any sense. Yet we do that thing emotionally with other people.
Mhm.
So I have the choice to say, you know what, for this situation, I'm not feeling like there's any sense of balance here. I'm feeling like I'm feeding a relationship, but my partner isn't. Maybe I shouldn't be in a relationship with them,
Yeah.
you
Yeah,
know?
it's really interesting. As I'm listening to you, I'm thinking about, what your answer pretty much straight away was no, I've never been in that relationship. Oh, I've never stayed in a relationship long enough where I
Okay.
felt the person was eroding and, eroding my feelings of self worth and constantly criticizing and putting down and things like that. And I was thinking about, our childhoods. And I think if you do grow up in an environment where you do have an overcritical parent, it's just, it's sort of, it's like a fish in water. It's like it's just so familiar to you that you don't
And
realize when you're being scolded again. You're in another relationship where, we talk about the frog in the boiling water, that you just inch the
right,
water up bit by bit by bit, and the frog doesn't jump out because it's not noticing the change in temperature until the frog's boiled. And I think
right.
when we've grown up in that environment where we've had a very critical parent, it's sort of half the course. We just think, well, that's what we do. We have people that in our lives that criticize us and put us down, and it's just a we've talked about this in previous shows where we've said, our parents are our role models for our present day relationships. If we don't do the work, we stay in those relationships not realizing that we're that frog and that we're being boiled, and that there's a much much better environment to swim around in than one where you're going to be boiled to death. So
Hmm.
um so yeah, I think it's really interesting that you would get out before it became like that. Not in my case. I stayed
Well,
in.
yeah. Well, let me add a piece to that, because when you said that, it really made sense to me. Because yes, I was raised in a family that wasn't part of the paradigm. However, I did spend, as I mentioned before in previous shows, I was bullied in high school by a bunch of boys. And so I guess in a way there was a blessing in this, because my radar now detects that sort of behavior pretty early, because it became so painful to suffer through that for 4 years with these guys that I was at school with. And it wasn't like a family dynamic necessarily, but that feeling of being put down, judged, bullied, pushed around, all these different things that I went through in that time put a taste in my mouth that was so, and it wasn't so much that I had to battle against it, but it became, I could sense that energy early now. So in
Mm,
a kind of gift in this, because it gave me like um, a detection method, a way
mhm,
to recognize when that sort of behavior is around, whether it's romantic or familial or business or any sort of relationship where I can feel that energy building up. I tend to be more, I wasn't going to say responsive, more like reactive, basically. No, 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 I back away, sort of thing, or I close the door on that.
yeah. And
You know,
again, listening to you and what I'm hearing is that you had enough stability in your family environment growing up where you didn't experience that you'd already experienced you'd experience life without that energy. Then, when that energy came into your life, that bullying, aggressive, putting down energy, it was alien to you. And you could recognize that maybe at that young age, you were a little helpless to do something in that immediate moment. And it went
right?
on for 4 years. But it was enough, as you say, because you'd had this other experience already where you didn't have that energy, that you were like, I never want to get into that energy again. That is toxic. I will not put up with it. I'm not going there. Now, for many people that grew up in the energy of an overcritical parent, it's like, again, your hand is on the fire, but you do not realize you're being burnt because it's just normal to you. You don't see it as extreme. It takes often physical violence for you to then go, oh, hang on a minute, this is abuse because now it's physical, where you
hmm
don't recognize the emotional abuse because it's something that was familiar to you.
Yeah, yes, and what I'm also recognizing from what you said, because I would say this because my family upbringing wasn't perfect by any means. Just to be clear, it's like making it sound and by presumption it is. But the thing is, my family dynamic was one where I did get raised in a family where the cheerleading support wasn't there, so it wasn't necessarily extremely critical, but it
Mm.
wasn't exactly praiseworthy. So I
Yeah,
was in the middle of that spectrum, so to speak. Just to be English reserve family. What can I say?
yeah,
But it's something where it was preferable to the bullying. So
yes,
yes, kind of contrast, it became much clearer. Yes, absolutely. And the experience of going through, and yeah, I did certainly feel hopeless during that time because I was outnumbered and there was no support for me. I didn't have, and one of my other things going through school, I spent a lot of time alone. I did a lot of friendship around me to support me in that challenge. So I didn't know there was a choice, as many of us didn't know when we were kids, but also I did see somewhat of safety in my family. I'll say it that way.
hmm,
Not it's the best place to be, but certainly not as bad as it was to be bullied, and certainly not as bad as you had when you were growing up. So understand the difference, and I think we all have, we all have our own upbringings and families, which is what gives us grist for the mill when we do the work as adults. So to put a piece on this with the idea of bank account as an adult, for many of us, I don't know that we have necessarily the skills automatically to be able to think of the relationship as something we add to, because very few of us are raised with that model,
yeah,
whereas through family, mixed peers, or our direct upbringing. So what you're sharing about is so key because everyone has their own story they've gone through, and very few, unfortunately, are raised in a family that really showed that model to them, where they could be in a healthy additive relationship from the get-go.
yeah. And I think that's sort of just a new way in a way. I think some people do it naturally. I mean, I know I saw growing up distant cousins that were very loving to each other. I think they were my mother's distant cousins. I didn't grow up with healthy role models around me. Even my mother's friends or you know, my, they just I did never saw a couple that demonstrated loving, all those qualities that make a healthy relationship. But I am
Yeah.
recalling two, and they were cousins of my mother's that I would very rarely see. And I know that they grew old together and they loved each other. And it
hmm
came naturally to them to be um, loving with their partner. And it's so funny because it was actually my grandmother's sister. And she was my grandmother's sister. I loved growing up. My grandmother, I couldn't bear to be around. She was so frightening. So obviously, my Auntie Lizzie, her children grew up replicating what they saw, which was a loving relationship between Auntie Lizzie and her husband. And they in turn treated their partners that way. So it was interesting. It was generational that they did it naturally. It was not natural in my family whatsoever, starting off from witnessing my grandparents and then my mother and etc. etc. Um, but it is with what we've talked about, with awareness, with therapy, with studying a spiritual understanding, whatever it is that we can enlighten ourselves and on how to show up in a relationship, how to maintain a healthy relationship. And I'll be the first to admit that looking back on my previous earlier relationships, I certainly wasn't aware of this, and I probably was just like everybody else and withdrawing and not consciously depositing into the relationship. I'm making myself sound awful. I wasn't that bad. But I'm just saying I'm more conscious of it now. I'm very aware of it. I'm very aware that, and all you have to do is put yourself in somebody else's shoes. How does it feel when your partner is lovely to you and appreciates you and thanks you? Well, all you need to do is, in turn, is do the same. Be appreciative,
hmm
be kind, be grateful. Focus on the good, not the bad.
Well, the model, which is funny because right at the beginning when you started talking about this, my thought was, what if both partners were adding because they wanted to, regardless of what the other person was doing, like
Yes.
almost let's add and not even say, well, they gave, then anything to give. It's that joy of being contributors. There we go, contributors. Couldn't say the word right to the relationship. Additive value, because I know we talked about the show before. I know we talked in other places that there's three components to the relationship. There's each partner and the relationship itself.
Mm-hmm.
And when that relationship itself as being the thing we both add to, it's almost like we are investing in our own futures and in our relationship and in each other as a wise investment, frankly, put it that way. So yeah, that makes sense in that sense,
And
that
it's
way.
also not just even in the future, because we do live in the feeling of our thinking. We do. So
Mhm.
when we're thinking positive, loving things about our partner, we feel great. Immediately, our
Right.
relationship is a good relationship. Now, when
Yeah.
we're focusing on the negative and nitpicking and nagging and things like that, and I'm not talking about addressing abuse or addressing really a toxic environment. That's completely different. I'm talking about just in a average relationship, average day in your average relationship. It's the same thing with my children. I hyper aware not to criticize them, because I just know what it felt like growing up with the constant criticism, and it just eroded my self worth. And I will refuse to do that to my children. I am. I mean, sometimes I'll get off the phone and somebody says, "Oh, is that your partner?" I say, "No, it's my children." They go, "Oh my God, you talk to your children like that?" And it's like, "Oh yeah, it's
But that's another big one of the biggest gifts, because having done the work you've done, that means you've stopped that paradigm in your family history. So now in the future, you get to contribute down the line, so to speak. And so the gift you give your children is such a wonderful thing, because then they don't have to deal with anything you have to go through yourself, which is a wonderful thing.
yeah,
So
no,
it's a great place to be.
yeah. So let's talk about what some of the benefits. Well, I already just mentioned them right now. The benefits of being aware, and it's not contrived, it's not rehearsed. It's just, as I say, living in the feeling of your thinking. Meaning, if you're thinking in a loving and a positive and a grateful way, number one, your life will change like that in one day. You're starting to feel better. You feel good. Um, but what it does also is, like, those are the relationships that last. Those
Yes,
are the relationships that can weather the storms. When really bad things happen, and some terrible things can happen to couples, whether it's the loss of a job, or the death of a family member, or God forbid, the death of a child, or something like that. That you need each other. You need to come together to weather that storm. And when there's enough of that goodwill there, I've seen it in couple. Actually, mentioning the death of a child, I've seen couples. They always say that most couples break up after the death of a child, and I think the average is that can happen. And I think what has happened, there's already a lack of goodwill in the relationship. There's already a lot of judgment and blaming and pointing fingers at each other. And when that happens, it's sort of whatever tenuous line that was keeping you together just breaks, and the relationship's gone. But
absolutely.
I've known couples that have weathered that, and that's because of the strength of their relationship before that event happened. Their love and commitment to each other, their goodwill, their bank account of goodwill was so full that even though that is one of the worst things that can ever happen to a couple, they they weathered it. They came through. They were there for each other. They didn't point fingers. They didn't blame each other. They weathered it, and it's remarkable to see. So that's one of the huge benefits of being aware, being conscious of maintaining this bank account of goodwill. Um,
Absolutely.
and it's the relationships that last. It's the ones that, as I said, that weather the storms, come through the hard times.
Yeah, I want to add a couple of things to this, just to make the way of investing smart too. A couple of quick things. One of which is that, for one of the ways is, and we talked about it before, about the five love languages, and I was in a conversation with somebody about it in a different paradigm. But the recognition is that when we understand what our partner's way of feeling love is, when we use that vehicle through which to contribute to them in their relationship, it lands more powerfully. That's the challenge sometimes when people say, "But I told you I loved you." The other person says, "I didn't feel it."
Mm-hmm.
So shifting, understanding how they receive is a big part of the process. The other part is, and it's funny because I started volunteering 8 months ago in a new group I volunteer with, where we do this thing with food distribution. I'm thinking, how many people in a relationship do that level of service? Oftentimes we have this thing, and this again back to the beginning, what we talked about the transactional piece. It's like if you just give to give without giving to get, it puts that investment and raises the value investment. So what you're talking about, I absolutely agree with. The more the investment in the relationship has given value to it, give its own life to it. So if something dramatic, traumatic, transformational happens, the relationship is solid enough to maintain because of the investment in it. That's a key piece. But you can do stuff too every day that adds to that value, that keeps contributing. And again, it's like one of my favorite things is going out to be of service. Is one of my spiritual principles. But doing that in with a partner, it's like, oh yeah, we can do that unconditionally as well. It's
Mm,
almost like different, just it's somehow we think about it differently because the relationship is more challenging sometimes to think unconditionally about versus going out and feed the homeless sort of thing.
mhm.
So bring that gift into the relationship.
Yeah, yeah, and the other thing that just popped up when you were saying that was, um, yeah, it's regardless of who you're giving to. Giving is a very selfish act. I mean,
Oh, totally.
we give because it feels so good. I mean, I'm
Exactly.
not aware and conscious of it, but it is. It feels, my son once said to me, "Why are you so loving?" And I was like, "Oh, I love being loving. I love the feeling I get." I mean, it's like
That's the thing. You are being it when you're doing it. Absolutely.
exactly. It's just why would I not feel this? Doesn't make sense
Right.
to me. But the other thing I was going to say is the trust as well. Again,
Hmm.
when when we really know that our partners really love and value us for the little things as well as the big things, the trust that we have, then we are not going to look outside the marriage. We're not going to, when we have an issue or we don't feel um, we trust that we can go to our partner with something that we might be ashamed of or that we're
Hmm.
embarrassed about or whatever it is, and the trust that we know that our partner's not going to take advantage of us and not beat us up, that they're going to be there for us and they're going to,
Wait. Yeah, absolutely.
yeah, so the level of intimacy that grows as well when it's a safe place to come to. I mean, it's
Hmm.
like, again, I'm thinking of my children. I remember, my children are now almost 31 and 27. It's going to be 31 in 2 days. But
Wow.
I remember, I caught him fibbing when he was like 15 or something, and I talked about how telling lies erodes a relationship, and but we talked about what was necessary for him to feel safe enough to tell me the truth all the time. And I
Yeah.
really heard him, and I really heard what I could do as well to make it a safe place, a safe container for the truth, to not freak out, to not have outbursts or be disappointed or how could you. It was just like, you tell me the truth and I will manage my emotions. And it was life changing, absolutely life changing. And again, it
Yeah.
goes the same thing in our personal relationships. If we are going to have goodwill, meaning that we will take care of ourselves, we will self soothe, even if we're hearing things we don't like, but we're going to take care of ourselves and not lash out. Again, that closeness, that the ability for absolute authenticity and honesty is there.
I want one more piece because you said something that echoed for me was about being in places which aren't necessarily comfortable. Is that one of the other benefits of this is you have healthier boundaries.
Yeah.
And boundaries in previous shows, but it's like that's a reminder that when you do this, I mean, it's all. Well, I love it. It's all connected, all integrated in a way that's so beautiful. So that when we understand who we are in relationship to everything else, our self support gets stronger as well.
Hmm.
And so we can say yes to things and no to things with clear authority, understanding, and responsiveness versus like reacting to back away or to be hooked in. So boundaries is part of this too. This little thing called a bank account has such impact and value in all our relationship paradigms. So it's a great piece to talk about.
Yeah. Exactly. Keep it topped up. No,
Yes, exactly.
don't be overdrawn. Well, I think we've covered it pretty well, Barry. So that's it for this week. Thank you, everybody. Thank you, Barry. That was another great chat there.
Thank you, Del. Idea. It was a good conversation. Thank you.
We will see you all next week. Thanks a lot.
Take care.
Bye-bye.
Bye. We trust you enjoyed this episode and invite you to share this with your friends and loved ones. In fact, please subscribe to our Relationship Mastery podcast. That way you'll get each new episode fresh and shiny as soon as it is released. We'd love to hear from you as well. So go ahead and enter your questions and comments at relationshipmastery.show. Take good care. We will connect with you in our next episode of Relationship Mastery.